Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. The question really haunting Europe right now, I think, is this. Is Russia violating Europe's skies with impunity? Or is this appearance of weakness actually masking something else, maybe a new calibrated strategy of deterrence?
That's exactly the tension, isn't it? And the anxiety across the continent is, well, it's palpable. We are firmly operating in what strategists call the gray zone.
The gray zone, that space between declared peace and open war.
Precisely. It's hybrid warfare, often by proxy, very messy.
In the data, it really shows this pressure is accelerating and fast. It's not just in the air either, is it? Our sources point to, well, a couple of critical trends showing this is multi-domain. What are the key numbers we should focus on?
Okay, first, airspace violations. They've roughly doubled in the past year. Doubled.
Wow.
And second, perhaps even more worrying, is the suspected Russian sabotage against critical infrastructure in Europe. ISA's data suggests a rise of, get this, 246% just between 2023 and 2024.
246%.
Yeah, and it's heavily focused on maritime and water facilities. The goal seems to be maximum stress, minimum accountability.
So our mission for you, the listener, is really to look beyond the headlines, the ones suggesting NATO is just paralyzed. We need to critically examine if the responses we're seeing are passive acceptance or if they're actually proportional, manageable actions designed to deter without sparking a massive escalation.
Let's dig into the evidence then. This rising tempo of sky probes, it feels like a constant drumbeat of incidents, especially since early September. Getting more serious, too.
It absolutely has.
Yeah.
The campaign feels structured, like it's designed to find political and military tripwires. I mean, look at Poland, September 9th.
That's a drone.
Over 20 Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace. And here's the key detail. Poland shot them down.
They shot them down. That sounds pretty clear, militarily speaking. It was a huge moment, the largest air transgression in NATO's entire 76-year history, and, crucially, the first time a NATO state actively shot down Russian assets during this phase of the war in Ukraine. It definitely set a precedent.
And that wasn't an isolated event. Poland's action was followed very quickly by something else, a more classic kind of incident, almost designed to raise anxiety levels.
You mean the Estonia incident? September 19th, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets. They entered Estonian airspace and just stayed there for about 12 minutes.
12 minutes? That's a long time in contested airspace.
Estonian officials called it the most egregious incursion they'd seen in over 20 years.
And the response was immediate, wasn't it? Jets scrambled from Italy, Finland, Sweden.
They did. And then there was that sort of icy moment of arrogance you mentioned, the Russian pilots acknowledging the intercept with a wing wave.
Like a nod. We see you. We know what we're doing. Testing the limits.
It was a very deliberate test of NATO resolve and readiness. And look how quickly the testing then migrated to critical infrastructure, Scandinavia.
The airports, yeah. Mysterious drone activity shutting down major airports briefly. Copenhagen, then Oslo. Just days apart.
And Denmark's defense minister, Troels Lund Poulsen, he didn't mince words. He called it specifically a hybrid attack from a professional actor. No ambiguity there.
Which brings us to the political fallout. The sheer frequency of NATO invoking Article 4.
Yes, that's what's truly remarkable here. The stress this is putting on the alliance's core mechanisms. Article 4, that's the clause for formal consultations when an ally feels threatened. It had only been invoked 7 times in NATO's entire history before this.
7 times in over 70 years.
Exactly. And now, twice in 2 weeks. First Poland, then Estonia. That signals a genuine, recognized moment of crisis right at the top of the alliance.
Okay, so if that's the level of pressure, if NATO's forced into these high-level crisis talks just over a 12-minute incursion, how can we challenge that framing? The idea that Russia is acting with impunity, doesn't that kind of prove they're getting away with it?
I understand why it looks that way, but I think that framing might be a bit too fatalistic. If you look closely, the evidence actually points towards graduated force being used.
Graduated force.
Yes, which is a definition of iterative deterrence by denial. Poland shooting down those drones, that's the clearest example. A penalty was exacted. It shows a calibrated response, not just letting it slide, not impunity.
But the big fear, the line that everyone seems worried about crossing, is shooting down a manned jet, like one of those MiG-31s over Estonia. Wouldn't that be an instant, massive escalation, risking a much wider war?
And that's the absolute critical distinction. Shooting down an uncrewed drone is, well, legally and politically much simpler. There's no risk of losing a pilot, which just dramatically changes the whole escalation ladder.
Right.
States generally have the right to neutralize hostile unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, when it's necessary and proportionate.
So the legal constraints we sometimes hear about, like the Chicago Convention's Article 3Bs, they mostly apply to civil aircraft.
Huh.
Or they create huge liability issues for manned military planes.
Precisely. That's why it's extremely unlikely NATO allies would want to repeat something like that highly volatile 2015 Turkey incident where they shot down a manned Russian jet. The difference between manned and uncrewed is key to understanding NATO's proportionality and, frankly, its restraint here.
So the decision rests first with the nation being violated national self-defense, and then these Article 4 consultations kick in.
Exactly. Russia is definitely probing, pushing boundaries, but NATO is managing the response within established, albeit stressed, boundaries.
Okay, but before we say NATO's got this deterrence thing figured out, we have to talk about the math, the economics. Because Moscow seems to be winning that battle, the economic attrition one. Our sources highlight this worry about the cost exchange.
And it's probably the most astute economic criticism of the current defense posture. Firing million-dollar Patriot missiles or even advanced missiles costing maybe $500,000 at drones that cost, what, $20,000?
Yeah, it's a terrible trade.
It's an absolutely terrible economic trade for the West. Russia wins that exchange every single time they force it.
And if the enemy can basically bankrupt your air defenses faster than they run out of cheap drones, they kind of achieve technical impunity that way, right?
Absolutely. And that's exactly why Europe is pivoting aggressively, technically. The idea of impunity is being tackled not just politically, but with technology, by rushing cheap counter-UAS, CUAS solutions out there.
CUAS. Systems specifically designed to defeat drone swarms cheaply.
That's the idea.
And this is where the tech gets really interesting. What specific systems are we talking about? Things that might actually flip that cost exchange back against Moscow.
Well, look at the examples coming through. Major procurement drives for things like Rheinmetall Skynex and Skyranger systems.
Okay, what do they do differently?
They often use fast, programmable cannon rounds. It falls under Echarad's short-range air defense, much, much cheaper per shot than firing off a traditional missile interceptor.
Right, brings the cost down significantly.
Yeah.
But the real potential game changer, maybe, is directed energy. Lasers.
Yes, exactly. Look at the UK's Dragonfire laser. This is the kind of technology that promises intercepts for literally pennies per shot once the system's built and powered.
Pennies per shot.
That's the claim. And it successfully moved into funded integration after trials in 2024. That could fundamentally change the economics of air defense. Pennies versus hundreds of thousands of dollars per shot. That's the scale of disruption we're talking about.
So while you still need the higher tier stuff, like Germany's European Sky Shield initiative with IRIS-T, Patriot, maybe Arrow 3 for ballistic missiles, these new cheap CUAS systems are the direct answer to this current drone swarm threat.
Exactly right. And if we connect this technical pivot back to the bigger strategic picture, Moscow's real goal here isn't just, causing a bit of chaos with violations. It's a classic strategy. Probe, learn, pressure.
Okay, probe, learn, pressure. So what are they actually learning when they send a MiG-31 across the border for 12 minutes?
Well, they're testing NATO radar responsiveness, its coverage. They're testing the rules of engagement, the ROE for individual nations. How itchy are their trigger fingers? And they're definitely trying to stress the political seams within the alliance. Fundamentally, it's about creating a pervasive sense of insecurity across multiple domains, remember.
And that multi-domain pressure definitely includes the seabed, doesn't it?
Crucially includes the seabed. All those reports about Russian deep-sea intelligence activity, often linked to their special spy vessels, the GUGI ships or the Yantar, plus the damage we've seen to Baltic cable infrastructure. It's all part of this coordinated low-level pressure campaign, creating vulnerabilities everywhere.
So these technical fixes, the CUAS, the lasers, they're great. But the political weak spots, the fissures within NATO, that seems like what Moscow really wants to exploit. That internal split feels like the biggest risk this probing exposes.
That really is the central political vulnerability. Russia is actively looking for that fault line, the gap between allies who favor, let's say, decisive action and those who prioritize restraint. And you see the contrast quite starkly sometimes.
Like with Poland's foreign minister.
Exactly. Radek Sikorski basically warned Russia, if another missile or aircraft enters our space, please don't come here to whine about it. Pretty clear implication of a shoot-down.
Yeah, and the counterpoint often comes from the military leadership, the ones actually involved in the intercepts.
Precisely. Look at Sweden's Major General Jonas Wickman. His jets responded to that Estonian incursion. He spoke very deliberately about the need for proportionality. He emphasized that while commanders have the authority to shoot down planes, they must always refer to the threat level.
Finding that balance.
Yes. And the inherent danger, the thing that probably worries strategists most, is that these internal European splits get magnified, potentially dangerously, by the prospect of Mr. Trump maybe standing back during a crisis. That could give Moscow exactly the disunity it's hoping for.
So the smarter play, then, isn't just reacting incident by incident. It's proactively setting up policies, clear rules that solidify cohesion. The sources seem to point towards needing a really detailed, layered denial strategy.
Yes, the absolute necessity here is clarity. The alliance probably needs to publish a clear, commonly agreed upon graduated response ladder just for uncrewed violations, what we call layered denial.
What would that look like?
It involves clear escalating actions, maybe starting with electronic warfare jamming signals, then moving to directed energy dazzling sensors with lasers, then maybe kinetic options like guns or cannons, and only then perhaps short-range missiles, and finally medium SAMs.
Standardizing the response across NATO.
Exactly. It standardizes the playbook, clarifies the risks for Moscow up front, and, importantly, gives the public confidence that there is a plan.
And since we established this isn't just an air threat, that layered denial needs to extend downwards, right, the maritime flank.
Absolutely essential. We have to harden the wet flank. That means treating seabed infrastructure, the cables, the pipelines, as actually defended terrain, which means investing in more seabed sensors, uncrewed underwater patrols, specialized platforms to really counter that GGI activity we mentioned.
And finally, there's leveraging the expertise, the hard-won, frankly, brutal expertise of the one country dealing with this exact drone and electronic warfare threat every single day. Ukraine.
That's such a critical policy point. President Zelensky's call for a joint aerial shield with Europe, it just makes complete strategic sense.
How so?
It would leverage Ukraine's immense battle-tested knowledge of CUAS, of sensor fusion, electronic warfare, all the things they've learned fighting Russia's tactics. It could rapidly raise the denial bar across Europe's entire eastern flank. It's a win-win, moving the discussion from theory to tested real-world practice.
So putting all this together, Russia is undeniably pushing boundaries, increasing the risk. But the reaction seems to be shifting, evolving. We're maybe moving away from just relying on that high-stakes risk of immediate, massive escalation and moving towards the perhaps greater safety and predictability of cheap, layered denial. And maybe most importantly, demonstrating visible unity among NATO members on how to respond.
I think that's a fair summary. The bottom line we're seeing is the rapid evolution of deterrence itself in this gray zone. Russia is attempting to test NATO's resolve without actually triggering Article 5, and that's forcing the West to adapt its defense spending, its technology, its doctrine.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to perhaps ponder. If the long-term strategic consequence of all this pressure is that Europe increasingly replaces expensive high-end systems like Patriot missiles with these cheap distributed laser and CUAS kits, does that technical pivot fundamentally change the whole calculus of escalation?
Does cheap defense make cheap probing irrelevant?
Right. Or does it just push the conflict into new, maybe even cheaper domains we haven't fully anticipated yet?
Something definitely to think about as these new technologies roll out.
Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs. And don't forget to like, comment, and share.